You can.
Oh, let me
Well,
just,
actually, I'll make sure that you can right now.
okay, yeah, it looks like I can't yet.
Mindy, do you want to help me with that? You think after all these Zoom years, I would have it down pretty easily.
I do it like 5 times a day, so.
Okay. Is that going to work?
It works.
Okay,
Rock
great.
on. Okay, thank you.
Maybe I'll keep us tiny up there in that circle.
I like that.
Okay, let's do that. Then it's not just a one-way thing.
Cool. Okay, so I was actually thinking that maybe we could start off with just like 5-10 minutes of some trauma sensitive yoga, and you can be just exactly where you are, just so that you can have a feeling of it in your body while we then go deep into unpacking like the principles and kind of go into the intellectual sphere around it. Does that sound okay? Okay. Yeah, so you can be exactly where you are. I mean, you could be cross-legged, you could have your feet on you can just be in whatever position you want. This is mostly just breath awareness, as well as perhaps a little bit of simple movement in your arms if you choose to. So I'm just going to move my screen a little bit away so I can have space. Okay. So yeah, if you would like, and also I want to mention, you could also stand, like if you're feeling like, oh, I will be sitting for a while, I want to stand for this, feel free to do that. So seated or standing, it's completely up to you. And then whatever position you're in, if you'd like, maybe just beginning to notice that you're breathing. So maybe just beginning to notice your breath coming in, either through your nose or through your mouth, and then your breath going out, either through your nose or through your mouth. And if you want to, you might choose to notice the feeling in your body, perhaps of the movement of your breath, like maybe in your chest or maybe in your belly. Maybe beginning to notice the feeling of the movement of your breath in your body as you breathe. And knowing that your breath can be at your pace. And if you want to, you could continue just in stillness like this, noticing your breathing in and out. Or if you want to add some movement, you might choose to maybe extend your arms out in front of you. And if you want to, as you breathe in, you could lift your arms up. And then as you breathe out, you might lower your arms back down. So this is one option for movement. You could lift and lower your arms if you want to, with your breath in and out. You could continue with this or in stillness. Or another option could be your arms out to the side if you want to. You could reach your arms out to the side and up as you breathe in. And then if you'd like, you could lower your arms back down as you breathe out. So several options. You could be in stillness, noticing your breathing. You could lift and lower your arms out in front of you if you want to, or out to the sides. maybe 2 or 3 more cycles of breath, knowing you can always stop at any time or choose some other movement. Yeah, and you can continue, or when you feel complete, feel free to come back to stillness or some other movement. You can come back to the group, come back to the room. Yeah, so that is just a little mini taste. And I'd love to just check in for a second and see if any of you want to share, just maybe a couple of you, anything you noticed about either what you experienced in your body, mind, or what you noticed about the cueing. Yeah, I'd love to hear anything that comes to mind if you want to share.
I can share. I noticed that my breathing is pretty choppy today.
Mm-hmm.
I also noticed I really like when I get choice, that it seems to get in my body way more, I guess.
Yeah.
When it's offered. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, choice is bedrock to trauma sensitive yoga. Absolutely bedrock. Yeah, great. Thank you. Any other noticings or sharings?
What I noticed was in that choice was very much, it was invitational, you know, so it wasn't just do whatever you want, but it was, here's a suggestion if you would like to try that. And here's another suggestion if you would like to try that.
Yeah.
I really appreciated that sort of guiding and inviting while leaving it very clear that it was a choice.
Well said. Thank you. Yeah, invitational language, as you may see on your outline, that's something we'll cover. That's also just such a huge part of this practice. Yeah, anything else? One more person, or we can move on. Okay, so thank you. We'll do a little bit more trauma sensitive yoga at the end, but it felt important that you have a little bit of embodied experience before we dive in to the intellectual. So when I'm talking about trauma sensitive yoga, I'm really talking about trauma sensitive yoga, and I'll refer to it as TCTSY because it's faster. But that what I spoke to earlier is my primary lens. And TCTSY is based on research, like many different research studies. And there are 3 main underpinnings of TCTSY, and that is trauma theory, which is, you know, deep into what is trauma, how does trauma manifest in the body, tons of trauma research. The second underpinning is attachment theory, and this isn't on your outline. I'm just briefly letting you know. Attachment theory is basically the studies and the research and the knowledge that biologically we are hardwired as human beings for connection. We need it. We need bonds with others. And then the third underpinning is neuroscience, a study of the brain, and especially what happens in the brain during a trauma response. And also the glorious reality of neuroplasticity, that our brain can heal and our brain can change. Yeah, so just wanted to give you that sort of like underpinning piece. And let's look at trauma. So I'll just be briefly covering trauma, the brain. And then I want to spend a majority of our time on how do we apply trauma awareness to teaching yoga. So briefly looking at trauma, David Emerson, who's the founder of TCTSY, he defines trauma as an extreme lack of choice. My whole organism wanted one thing to happen, and the other thing happened. And this is from his book, Overcoming Trauma Through Yoga, which I highly recommend. And then Peter Levine, the founder of somatic experiencing. Have any of you heard of that modality? Okay, yeah. His first book is called Waking the Tiger, Healing Trauma. And that's one that I would recommend. I mean, it's dated, and he is a white man. So there's limitation in his writing, like he's an older white man. And so the time yeah, go ahead, Shelley.
I was just telling people, because you're saying some really good resources and you got them listed on the back page.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, so just know that book, like there are parts or things that he'll mention or say that like I don't agree with, or it's just not useful, just in terms of like perpetuating, racism, and white supremacy, and yeah, just know that like there's certain pieces kind of perpetuating stereotypes, I will say. So yeah, it's so hard, with these books by these kind of old white men. It's like there's some really valuable information, and then there's also pieces that stand out like with a critical lens that, ooh, this should not be said. This should not be written. Like, this is not okay. Does that make sense? Yeah, and Bessel van der Kolk is another one. And that book is on your resource list too. It's called The Body Keeps the Score. Have any of you read that book or heard about it? Okay. Same thing, like he's an older white guy, and nothing against white men, but like there is awareness that needs to happen in some of these older white guys. But he was the head of the trauma center that trauma sensitive yoga comes from, where David Emerson is, but he actually got removed from his own trauma center a few years ago because of like bullying and just kind of being mean and a jerk. So, and it may have been worse than that. I'm not sure of all the details, but then his book, The Body Keeps the Score, has some of the most up-to-date trauma research in book form. So it's like we have to hold, this complexity. So anyway, back to Peter Levine, the founder of somatic experiencing. His definition or a quote that he has on trauma, a common denominator of all traumas is an alienation and disconnection from the body. So a common denominator in all traumas is an alienation and disconnection from the body and a reduced capacity to be present in the here and now. So this is something that trauma sensitive yoga directly works with, like reconnection with one's body and opportunities to have present moment experiences in the body. So we'll talk about this as we go. But trauma, it has many causes. It comes in many forms. There's, single event traumas like car accident, medical procedure, a fall. There's recurring traumas. And one pervasive type of recurring trauma is complex trauma, which abuse and neglect would be examples of complex trauma. Usually complex trauma is interpersonal or relational in nature, and power dynamics are involved. So Judith Herman, who's a Harvard psychiatrist, she teaches at Harvard, defines complex trauma as trauma that occurs within relationships and more than once. So the sense of recurring relational trauma. Some other types of trauma, well, and I'll say this, with complex trauma, this is originally why TCTSY was developed. It was developed as an adjunctive therapy or treatment for complex trauma, for relational trauma, for developmental trauma, rather than like for single event trauma, although that totally can benefit from trauma sensitive yoga, as well as other types of trauma like systemic oppression, white supremacy, or as Resmaa Menakem, the author of My Grandmother's Hands, that book is on your resource list too. Racialized trauma and the pathway to mending our hearts and bodies. Are any of you familiar with Resmaa's work? Okay, so a few of you. Yeah, and he's local to Minneapolis, a somatic trauma healing therapist. But he refers to white supremacy as white body supremacy, white bodies being supreme, the standard. So systemic oppression in that regard, racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, capitalism, colonization, ableism, like all these systems and all the conditioning can be a cause for trauma. Also war and refugee trauma, pre and perinatal trauma, historical generational trauma, as well as secondary trauma, like vicarious trauma. So it feels like the more awareness we as yoga teachers can have around systems and like systemic oppression, the better, as well as awareness around like the places that we may hold privilege or dominant culture identities. So like for myself, some of my privileged or dominant culture identities would be that I'm white, I'm cisgendered, I'm able-bodied. So like having awareness around where we hold privilege and awareness of systemic oppression. And trauma-centered, trauma-sensitive yoga, David Emerson and everybody who's over there in Boston, they are doing extremely good work integrating this awareness in, and it's evolving, it's changing. So I'd love to take a few minutes just to touch on the ACEs study. And the ACEs study is basically a study of adverse childhood experiences. Have any of you heard of this study? Okay, yeah, so some of you have. This is a study like really groundbreaking in terms of kind of people understanding trauma and the prevalence of trauma. Back in the mid to late 1990s, out here in California, a healthcare system called Kaiser Permanente partnered with the CDC and surveyed 17,000 people. So when people would come in, adults would come in to have their physical exam, like their yearly exam or whatever at the hospital, they would also get a survey. And it was a 10-question survey regarding their childhood experiences and their current health status and behaviors as adults. So some of the questions on the survey were like, were your parents separated or divorced, like when you were a kid, really up to age 18? Did someone in your household have mental illness? Did you experience or witness abuse, like physical, emotional, sexual abuse? Another question was a household member incarcerated? Was there substance abuse in your household? So there were 10 of these questions, and the studies showed that the more questions a person answered yes to, the higher their health risk. And some of the health risks were coronary heart disease, stroke, diabetes, depression, anxiety, disability. There was a correlation with alcohol and drug abuse, as well as lower reported income, unemployment, lower educational attainment, difficulty in relationships, intimate partner violence, as well as violence in general. So the study showed that the effects of trauma or the effects of adverse childhood experiences are across the board in people's lives. It's like not just physical health, it's emotional health, it's relationships. The effects show up in many, many different ways. And the adverse childhood experiences studies also showed that ACEs are very common. So 2 out of 3 adults reported at least one adverse childhood experience, and 1 out of 5 adults reported 3 or more ACEs. And since the 90s, data has continued to be collected and still is being collected, and in more and more and more states. So not just California, but across the United States now, so much data is being collected. And the results over the years and into the present confirm the results of the original ACE study. So again, the results reveal that trauma is pervasive. So just thinking about that when we're thinking about who's walking into our classroom as yoga teachers, there's probably a good chance that there have been some adverse childhood experiences, and that there may be some people suffering from traumatic experience. So I want to share a screen now of the ACEs pyramid. How's that showing up? Okay, super. Yeah, so check this out. So it's really interesting. The bottom 2 rows were just added recently. So this pyramid, like from the mid-90s, till not that long ago, it started with adverse childhood experiences at the bottom. And now social conditions and local context, as well as generational embodiment and historical trauma, have been added, which feels huge, feels so important, due to the growing awareness within society of the impact of historical and generational trauma and systemic oppression. And Resmaa Menakem, who I mentioned before, he calls generational trauma and systemic oppression, he calls it weathering. Like it has a weathering effect on bodies who experience it. Like some bodies, some nervous systems do not get to experience as much safety as others do in our society. And no amount of trauma work is really going to change that. It's like our culture needs to change. Society, the systems need to change. So adding these 2 rows at the bottom, it really takes into account that we as human beings are born into structures and conditions that are already established in society. And you know, these structures come with built-in economic and social inequities and are steeped in racial bias. So like looking at this pyramid, generally speaking, the more historical and generational trauma in one's lineage, and the more societal oppression that a person experiences, the more adverse childhood experiences, we're kind of moving up here, the more adverse childhood experiences a person tends to have. And then the further one moves up, and more quickly usually up that pyramid.
Jessa, can I say something about that?
Please.
Something that's really striking to me that's not on here, and maybe it's in your purview as well, but the place of incarceration, that's not necessarily on this pyramid, but there is also a direct link with the science to ACEs and foster care and all those different things that actually leads to incarceration. And that I think that that's something worth noting and mentioning.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Shelley. Yep, that's huge. And so I recommend Googling ACEs if you're newer to this study, and just reading more about it, as well as, let me share this other screen here, as well as checking out Nadine Burke Harris's TED Talk, How Childhood Trauma Affects Health Across a Lifetime. It's excellent. And she says, she's a pediatrician. She was also the Surgeon General of California, but I think she's recently, that has ended. But she said all doctors should have their patients' ACEs scores, like right there as they're meeting with each patient. Like that should just be part of common knowledge when working with people, like medically, as well as psychologically. But this is an excellent, excellent talk. Okay, I'm just gonna close this screen. And then I mentioned before the book, The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk, having some of the most recent trauma research. And what the research, more recent trauma research is showing is that trauma lives in the body. And very importantly, that trauma bypasses language. So we'll go into this more in a moment, but if trauma lives in the body and it bypasses language, we need body-based, somatic, kind of bottom-up approaches in trauma recovery and trauma healing. And top-down approaches like talk therapy or cognitive therapy are also very useful. But if trauma bypasses language, it's like there needs to be a bottom-up component to the trauma healing process as well. And this is where bringing trauma awareness, trauma sensitivity into yoga is a great example of potential bottom-up healing. So let's look briefly at what happens in the brain during trauma, or I should say what happens in the brain during a trauma response. So I say trauma response because it's known now that an event that leads to lasting trauma or dysregulation in the nervous system, like hypervigilance, continuous hypervigilance, or dissociation, an event that leads to that in one person could have little to no lasting effect on another person. So does that make sense?
Mhm.
Like you know, let's say, you know, you're out in the street and you almost like get hit by a bus, but you don't. One person could like kind of shake that off and kind of go on with their day, and their nervous system kind of goes into, you know, high alert for a few minutes, and then it comes back down and it's more regulated. Another person, it might take 2 or 3 days to kind of move forward from that event. So trauma is not necessarily in the event itself, rather it's in the body's response to the event, the nervous system's response to the event. So I'm going to share a little brain picture. And this is very basic, but I just really liked it. Let's see. Oops. Okay. So if you're curious about this website, it's the National Institute for the Clinical Application of Behavioral Medicine, NICABM. So you can find this image there. But I just wanted you to have this very simple look at the triune brain. And it's kind of cool to look and read these different, about the different parts of the brain. So I can always send an email and include these images. I can send it to Shelley, but you can find it online at that website too. So during a trauma response, the neocortex, which is this primate human brain here, the neocortex, and particularly the prefrontal cortex, goes offline, basically, just offline. And this is the most newly evolved part of our brain, which controls language. So this is where trauma bypasses language, because the language parts of our brain shut down. So the neocortex, the prefrontal cortex control language and communication. These parts of the brain control higher cognitive functions like reasoning, planning, the ability to remember events and time chronologically. So this is shutting down or being disrupted during a trauma response. The prefrontal cortex controls the ability to self-regulate. And it does this by regulating other parts of the brain activity, like the fight or flight instincts of the reptilian brain, which you'll see right here. The neocortex controls sensory association areas. And when this area of the brain is affected, it disrupts our ability to localize the sensation of touch. So if we're being touched on the shoulder, we may not feel that touch in the area of our shoulder. Instead, we feel it somewhere else on our body. So we'll come back to this when we talk about physical adjustments or physical assists in a yoga class. And then lastly, in the brain, something called the interoceptive pathways are interrupted during a trauma response. And that mostly happens in the insula, which is part of the neocortex, and the anterior cingulate cortex, which is part of the limbic brain or the mammalian brain. So the cortex and the subcortical region, these two parts of the brain, there's information going back and forth. And this gets disrupted during a trauma response. And so let's talk about what interoception is. So interoception and these interoceptive pathways, like this is our ability to sense what is going on in our bodies, what we're feeling in our bodies, like the ability to sense what is going on within the boundary of our skin. And there's like a kind of highbrow definition that I think I included on your outline, that you can, well, I'll just read it. The physiological condition of the entire body and the ability of visceral afferent information to reach awareness and affect behavior, either directly or indirectly. The system of interoception as a whole constitutes the material me and relates to how we perceive feelings from our bodies. So interoception is so crucial to feeling a sense of this is my body. This is what I'm feeling in my body, like the material me. So an example of interoception would be sensing like any sort of physical sensation in our bodies, like warmth in the belly, tightness in the shoulders, pain in the knee. Our heartbeat, feeling our heartbeat would be an example of interoception. The feeling of like maybe when you sit back into chair pose and you're there for a while, you start to feel your upper legs, your quads, like contracting, engaging. Being able to feel that in your legs is interoception. Hunger is also an example, being able to sense when you're hungry, like for example, when your stomach growls, noticing that's interoception. Pain, noticing pain is interoception. So when trauma affects the interoceptive pathways in the brain, it disrupts people's ability to sense what is going on in their body, what they're feeling in their body. So like in a yoga class, it could be difficult for someone to feel or to know how much is too much for me in this stretch or in this posture or this breath work practice. And if there are physical adjustments happening in class, it could be hard for a person to sense, does this adjustment actually feel okay for me? So interoception or interoceptive awareness, it has not only the purpose of feeling like a sense of this is my body and this is what's happening in my body, but it also gets us to act. It gets us to take action. So when we feel our stomach growl, we know it's time to go get food. If we feel a muscle is tight, we may choose to stretch it a little bit, rub it a little bit, put some muscle relaxing cream on it. And when we have difficulty sensing or interocepting our body's sensations, it can be really hard to take effective action on our own behalf for our own well-being.
Jessa, I'm thinking of something with what you're talking about. And
Yeah.
I always thought about it primarily in how you're speaking about it. For me right now, I'm also thinking about pleasure and the ability to sense pleasure and
Yeah.
how important that is in terms of our development. And when we don't feel it or deny that, then what is the psychological behavioral impact when you don't feel a sense of pleasure?
Oh, thank you. Yes, 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 yes. Thanks so much for bringing that in, Shelley. Yep. Yep, exactly. So when we have difficulty sensing our body's sensations, it can be really hard to feel safe in our body, to feel connected to our body. So David Emerson writes in his book, Trauma Sensitive Yoga in Therapy, which is also an excellent book I recommend. It's more recent than the other book, Overcoming Trauma Through Yoga. He writes, to be traumatized is to live in a body with which you have an unreliable and unpredictable relationship. And in large part, the unreliability and unpredictability come from the inability to interocept due to those pathways in the brain being disrupted by trauma. So keeping this in mind as we cue in our yoga classes, we can offer our students opportunities to notice and feel sensations in their bodies. Like, for example, in the little mini bit that we did at the beginning, the one interoceptive cue that I offered was maybe noticing the feeling of the movement of your breath, maybe in your chest or in your belly as you're breathing. So that would be one example of bringing awareness to maybe noticing what you're feeling in your body. And I'll give more examples of that later. But we can give our students these opportunities to strengthen their capacity for interoceptive awareness, which then is information that they can use if they want to take action moment to moment in a yoga class. They can be using the information in their bodies to then make choices and take action. And then lastly, this is all relevant because of neuroplasticity, like because we know now that the brain can change and heal. Practicing interoception can renew the interoceptive pathways in the brain. So practicing interoception can renew the interoceptive pathways in the brain. So next we're going to move into, okay, how do we apply trauma sensitivity in a yoga class? But before we go there, I just want to check in and see if you have anything to share, any comments, or any questions at this moment. And it's also an opportunity if you want to kind of move your body a little bit. I mean, this was all very like in the head. So if you want to kind of move a little bit, take a drink of tea or water, whatever you have.
Jessa, could you say the name of the website again? I didn't write it fast enough where the brain is shown.
Oh yeah.
And maybe
Yeah.
for my angle.
No, it's okay. Let me pull it up here. Okay, it is the National Institute. Well, here, should I just give you the website? It's so much shorter. It's www.nicabm.com, nicabm.com, and that's the National Institute for the Clinical Application of Behavioral Medicine.
Perfect, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, so as we go through, I should have said this at the beginning, but just feel free, please, to take care of your bodies. So when you want some movement or some stretching or to go to the bathroom or anything at all, just please feel free to do that. You don't have to wait for anything or a certain moment. Okay, so let's move into applying trauma sensitivity to our yoga teaching. And by the way, I have found that learning about trauma-centered, trauma-sensitive yoga has really, like, over the years, integrated into all the different parts of my life. So my relationship with my partner, friends, colleagues, how I relate with myself. It's changed. It's changed so much. And you'll notice that a big part of trauma-centered, trauma sensitivity is thinking about power dynamics in all situations, like really having an awareness of power dynamics, and also the use of language, being very intentional with the use of language. And if you think about these two things, shared power and use of language, this is like applicable to almost every situation in life. So yeah, just know that this can go way beyond the yoga room. Okay, so there are 5, we're going to focus on 5 different domains of a yoga class: language, teacher qualities, physical assists, exercises, which would be like postures, forms, breath work, things like that. And then the environment, the actual space. So let's look at language first. So how can we use language with trauma awareness, with trauma sensitivity, to create safety, to support agency and empowerment in our students, and also to provide opportunities for present moment experience and interoception? So there's 2 styles of language. One is invitational language, and the other is interoceptive language. So invitational language is really like the bedrock of trauma sensitive yoga. So to precede each cue that we give with an invitation, to precede each cue that we give with an invitation. This means that we're offering people choice with every cue when we precede it or include an invitation. So some examples of invitational cues, I listed some here. You know, if you would like, if you want to. So I'll kind of extend and give more to it. So if you want to, you might choose to lift your arms, or you might choose to extend your arms out to the side. So there's the invitation, and then there's also giving options, giving choices, which we'll go into more later. If you feel like it, could be another invitation. If you feel like it, you could experiment with bending your knees, or you could keep your legs straight. It's totally up to you. I love saying it's totally your choice, or it's totally up to you. And it's really important, like, to find your own voice around it, which you naturally do as you practice teaching. A few more invitational words could be perhaps, maybe, possibly. And I like to often combine, like, if you would like, maybe lifting your arms. Like, you just really can't overdo it when it comes to inviting and offering choice. If you feel like it, you're welcome to, or You're welcome to take a break at any time for as long as you need. Another example could be as you are ready. As you are ready, if you want to, maybe coming to standing, or you could remain seated. How do you feel with this language? Like, as I'm kind of saying some of these invitational phrases, if any of you want to share, like, how does it make you feel, like in your nervous system, in your body, in your mind? Any words come to mind? Just for your own experience. Calm. Mm.
Say,
Mm.
Curious.
Mm.
in control, as in I'm in control of what I do.
Yes. Rock on. Yes. Yeah, that agency piece, right? When we have choice, oh my God, then we can like refer to our own expertise, our own sense of, well, what is good for me? What is right for me? What do I want? Yeah.
Had the experience of being offered choice and feeling overwhelmed.
Yep.
Like too much choice or too little time between choices to actually make a choice. Like
Yeah.
if the suggestions are coming one on top of the other, I sometimes don't, it feels more challenging sometimes to be able to connect with what my experience is because I'm listening to what the choices are.
Oh, thank you so much for speaking into that. Yep. So couple things, like when it comes to offering choices, generally the recommendation is either A or B, like two choices, A or B, or at the most A, B, C. But once you go beyond three, like a lot of times it can just be completely overwhelming. And pace-wise, what you spoke into, when we're teaching in a trauma-sensitive way, naturally the pace is slower because people need time to be able to feel, to be able to process the information, and then, you know, have the actual experience in their bodies if they choose to, and take action based on what they are noticing in their bodies. So when we're teaching in a trauma sensitive way, it tends to be a much slower, as well as usually a little bit gentler class. It doesn't necessarily have to be. You can integrate this into Ashtanga or, you know, some intense styles of yoga, but generally the pace needs to slow down. Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you so much for speaking into those pieces. So important. Yeah, thank you. So often, you know, I will also add ing onto verbs. Not always, but like I'll say, if you would like, maybe lifting your arms instead of maybe lift your arms. Somehow adding the ing, and that's kind of just my style, my way of communicating. It just feels like it softens it even more, seems to allow more space, room for choice. So when we use invitations, we're truly offering choice to people, and we are centering our students' agency. We're centering our students' agency. And we're sharing power. We're going to talk more about power later, but giving invitations is a way to create a shared power dynamic or relationship, which immediately counters the power over or abuse of power dynamic that is often part of trauma, especially relational trauma. And also know that if someone is not used to making choices, it can take some time for this to feel familiar or even just like something they want to do. You know, it can be really kind of disorienting sometimes if someone is not used to making choices. And it can also be an interesting experience as a yoga teacher to be offering choices and look out into the classroom and see everybody potentially doing all kinds of different things. Yeah, that can be an interesting. So it can also take the yoga teacher some time to become familiar with this choice making dynamic, because yeah, we're not trained to do this so often, you know, as teachers. So it's an interesting journey. It's ripe with growth. Let's see here. So when we use invitational language, we are not telling people what to do, right? We are not coercing anybody. We're not manipulating anybody into doing anything. We're not commanding anyone, which is phenomenal. Again, because coercion and manipulation are very common power dynamics in complex relational trauma, in situations of abuse. So offering people choice counters the trauma paradigm. So a little experiment. If you would like to, maybe listen to me speak these two different cues. And as you hear each one, if you want to, maybe noticing what each one feels like to you, like in your body, your nervous system. So you don't have to physically do these cues. It's just more about listening to them and seeing how they feel. So if you want to, feel free to listen to these two cues and just sense how you feel. So the first cue, lift your arms. Lift your arms. And the second cue, if you would like to, you might choose to lift your arms. If you would like to, you might choose to lift your arms. I have to say, even speaking the two different cues is like a totally different feeling in my own body. So with the first cue, lift your arms. Like, who's in charge there?
You.
Yeah, I'm totally in charge. Okay. And what if you don't want to lift your arms? Like, is that going to be okay? We don't really know, right? I'm saying lift your arms. Like, I might get upset if you don't lift your arms. So what kind of relational power dynamics does that cue foster?
It's authoritative.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Power over versus
Control.
with.
Bingo. Yeah, you don't really have a choice. Not really. Yeah. With the second cue, if you would like to, you might choose to lift your arms. Like, who's in charge there? Yeah. And if you don't want to lift your arms, does it feel like that is an option?
Yeah.
Yeah. And what kind of power dynamic or relationship does this foster?
Share power.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we're on way more equal ground. Because being a yoga teacher, like we have inherent power in our position, in that role. And we are leading the class, we are facilitating a class, but we want to make every effort that we can to level the playing field, to cultivate shared power, to really counter the trauma paradigm, and to allow people, give people opportunity to strengthen their agency and empowerment, their sense of having choice. So with I just want to speak a little bit more about commands. When we don't offer an invitation, when we tell people what to do. And you know, in my yoga teacher training way back when, one of the people who was training us, she said, people come to yoga class to be told what to do. Because I was using the word maybe. I was like doing my little demo, and I was using the word maybe because that just kind of came with my personality more. And I was given like a red flag or whatever, you know, they would raise a flag, like if it was good, if it was bad. I mean, whoa, you know, this is like intense. I was getting this red flag, and it was like, people come to yoga class to be told what to do, you know, be more directive. And I'm like, whoa, okay. So anyway, when we offer commands, we tend to create an externalization of experience. So the person receiving the command is going to automatically be oriented outside of themselves. They're going to automatically be oriented to the person giving the command, like the authority, rather than being oriented to their own self. Okay. So the locus of control or power is outside of the person when there's a command being given. It's external. And with a command, you know, it's implied there really is no choice here. And often there can be a moralistic component, like right and wrong, good and bad, like to follow or obey the order of the external authority is the right thing to do. To not follow it, to not lift my arms could be wrong, and or could displease or upset the authority, the person in power. And in relational or complex trauma situations, you know, disobeying can actually be very dangerous. Like if you think of a child in an abusive home or an adult with an abusive partner, like often to survive, we learn to do what the other person tells us for survival. So if someone has a history of that and they walk into a class and it's commands, that's on one hand could be very familiar, but it could also be very triggering. So invitations, on the other hand, establish a shared power sharing relationship, and it shifts the orientation from external to internal. It shifts the locus of control or power from outside of oneself to inside of oneself. And David Emerson said in one of his presentations, he said, if you have a real choice, then you get to refer to your own experience and what is right for you, not someone else. So invitational language choices offer the possibility for genuine choice to be made. And it removes any moralistic component. Like there's no right or wrong. There's no good or bad. It's up to you. What do you want to do? And then one more thing about invitational language. And then if you have any questions or comments about it, we can go there. But one more thing is to teach in a trauma sensitive way, like to really genuinely foster the sense of offering choice. We want to avoid using I statements when we're cueing. So like, for example, I invite you to lift your arms. Even if we add if you want to at the end, still having that sense of I invite you, or I suggest, or I whatever, is externalizing. It's putting the attention on us as teachers, what we want, or what, you know, so to kind of try to eliminate that as much as possible from our language. It just centers the student's choice. It centers the student's power more and more. So anything coming up for you? Any questions, any thoughts, anything at all about the invitational language piece?
I don't know that there's an answer to this, but I've worked with people in trauma before that choice is very difficult for them. It's not a practiced skill.
Yeah.
because, You know, it's not something they are used to. And so have you experienced that in class? Like, is there an approach you take, maybe starting with something that's less choice-based, or I don't know if you want to speak to that at all, if you've had experience with that specifically?
Yeah, so that is definitely what you're saying is a common experience for people who are not used to making choices. But what they've found, like in the trauma center, trauma sensitive yoga research over the years, like since 2002, is really that consistency, predictability is like really the most, one of the most important things. And so, so I wouldn't offer any commands, or I wouldn't be more directive in one part of the class than the other, or at one, you know, if it were a series kind of building up, I wouldn't start directive and then ease more into invitations. It's just like, here we go. Like, this is all about choice. And you know, you could even say, and I did say when I was working specifically with a whole group, where everyone, you know, like at the Domestic Abuse Project, where it's known, like, we're here healing from trauma. I wouldn't always say this in a yoga studio class, but you could, but it would be something like, you know, making choices can sometimes be very difficult. And so just, you know, really honoring that this is a process, and it may take some time, you know, to become more, to even accept that I have choice, that I can make choice, that I'm not going to get hurt. No one's going to come after me. No one. Yeah. So it's very real. So thank you so much for bringing that up. But what the research has shown is that, wow, over time, people learn how to make choices, and it is incredibly empowering and life-changing. Yeah. Anything else thoughts or anything you want to speak into?
I think this all makes a lot of sense, and like I could even feel it in my nervous system, the difference between lift your arms, like, oh, that was kind of a jolt in the invitation, but what I'm sort of struggling with is like, how do you then, I'm not picturing in my head how to even plan like a class. Like, would you ever stop and show this is how you do a pose, or you know, where's the balance, I guess, in all of that?
Yeah, so something that we'll talk about in a little bit is called shared authentic experience, where you're facilitating and participating. So generally, like, I would be on my mat practicing the whole class with the class. I wouldn't walk around the room. And generally I wouldn't demo, like kind of stop everything and demo something and then we'd get going again. It would just be like, I'm doing it right with you, right here and now. And I'm moving slowly and going through the different options, and, feel free to join me if you would like to, or, try this out. So yeah, like, I'm sure there'd be a way that you could integrate that, like a demo or something, and be very invitational about it. Like, I'm showing you a couple different ways, or a couple different things you could try out. And then if you'd like to, feel free to do so, and then you can all be doing it. With the invitational language, in terms of planning a class, it's just kind of like learning that, okay, before I say every cue, or as part of every cue, I'm going to include an invitation. So it could be any posture or choices between postures. It could be any breath work practice, but you're just giving the invitation so they know they have choice right off the bat, whether or not they even do it. Does that make sense?
It does. I think I'm thinking of people who maybe are brand new to yoga, that in my mind, like, I would have to do a little bit more instructing in how to, but maybe not. I don't know.
Yeah, this is really like a paradigm shift. The trauma sensitive approach, it's really centering that there's no right or wrong way to do this. You can feel it out in your own body and choose for yourself. So it really is like a shifting. So, like, for example, I don't offer like alignment cues, or your foot should be here and here, like for example, for warrior one, I would say, like, say we're standing at the top of our mats, I would say, if you'd like to, you might choose to step maybe your right foot back, or I would even say step 1 foot back. They can choose right or left, right? We don't all have to be uniform or together. So, and I wouldn't say like, make sure your, back toes are pointed forward at a whatever degree angle, I mean, I used to teach this way. But then as trauma sensitivity has come in more and more, I've realized, oh yeah, that really, when we're looking at like trauma healing, that stuff doesn't really matter. Like, the stuff that matters is like, we're fostering their choice making and giving them plenty of space to do so, but specific options to choose from, so it's not overwhelming. And then leveling out that power dynamic. So I'm not the gatekeeper of wisdom, of yogic wisdom. Like, the student, what they're feeling in their body and who they are takes precedence over anything that I might think is better or right for them to do. So is that kind of, I mean, it's a total kind of mind shift. That if you kind of go deeper into this, it just happens over time that the teaching might start to shift, or but kind of bringing in this stuff bit by bit to experiment with it, could be a way to kind of try it on and see if it's for you. Because I don't know that everybody resonates with teaching in this way. Like it isn't necessarily for everyone. But I think we can integrate parts of it if that feels aligned for us as teachers. Yeah, thanks for bringing that up.
Jessa, I have
Okay,
a
yeah,
question.
yeah.
You mentioned, well, it's on this page, so shared authentic experience. If we're talking about invitational language, how about using we? So, when you're offering choices, you said
Yeah.
don't I statement.
Yeah. Yep.
Would you use we statements? in that sense, or do you want to stick with you or?
Yeah, great question. Yep, usually we're sticking with you because it's all about, because often with trauma, there's a sense of kind of that material me gets really diffuse, or we get very disconnected from our own individual bodies. So it's really about fostering the sense of coming home to you, coming home to you. And so like in cueing also with body parts, I would say maybe lifting your arms instead of, I mean, I've even heard some teachers say arms or the arms or, you know, like to really personalize it. Like you have ownership of this body. This is your body. These are your hands. These are your feet. You get to do what you want with your feet. That sort of thing. So I've actually not used we, but that's something to think about, you know, like if there's some point in the class, oftentimes at the end, I'll say something about gratitude, you know, for this time together and to practice together. Like I'll bring in a group sort of we-ness then, but otherwise it's very focused on like, what do you want for you? Yeah, great question. Okay, so let's go into the interoceptive language. So this is language that we can offer people opportunities to notice what they're feeling in their bodies and to really have present moment experiences in their bodies. So there's a quote here, and I don't know who said it, but it came through when I took the trauma sensitive yoga training, and it was unknown there too. But sometimes in order to survive, we have to leave our bodies. In order to live, we have to come back. So interoception is a way that we can come back. So generally in interoceptive cueing, we want to give very concrete, visceral, body-oriented cues. So bringing attention to what's happening in the body right here and now. Like focusing on physically feelable things really allows people to strengthen their ability to feel what's going on in their bodies. I'll give an example here of an interoceptive cue. So starting with an invitation, if you would like, you might choose to tilt your head to one side. And if you decide to try this, perhaps noticing is a big interoceptive word, noticing if you feel any physical sensation in the side of your neck. So I'll say it again. If you'd like, you might choose to tilt your head to one side. And if you decide to try this, perhaps noticing if you feel any physical sensation in the side of your neck. And then I'll often add, you know, at least a couple times throughout a class, I'll add this statement, knowing that it's completely natural to sometimes not feel any sensation at all. So really important to normalize that sometimes we don't feel anything. And that this is actually sometimes a very common experience for people who've experienced trauma, where these interoceptive pathways in the brain have been disrupted, just not feeling any sensation, or if there's a lot of dissociation.
So I'll give an example of that. Just coming to mind, we have 4 kids and 2 of them were adopted, and one of them, when they were younger, would just hugely act out and have enormous rages, very violent. And then his brother, Ruben, who was adopted, I would ask him afterward if he was sitting there kind of watching all of this violence unfold. And we would try to help him to connect with his body or his mind or sensations and say, how do you feel? Like when this is all escalated and physical holding and there's removing, like it was a really big deal. And Ruben would just always say, nothing.
Yeah.
And it was
Yeah.
the biggest red light, and to this day, that's still, so it's all inside.
Yeah.
And he feels nothing. He was with us on the border, trying to get him to like kind of embody life and with my husband and seeing the migrants, you know, in deep distress. And he'd say, I know I should feel for these people. And I'm hearing their stories and everybody's really moved. And he said, I don't feel anything.
Yeah. Yeah.
It makes me just so tearful because
I know.
life and not have the sense of like life is happening all around you, but you really can't sense it.
Yeah.
And you feel like such an outsider to the experience of living.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh.
We all feel those things, but
Yeah.
we experience trauma.
Yeah.
It's just so shut out.
Yeah. 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 Oh, Shelley. Yep. Oh, so true. Yep. It's so true. And like Peter Levine's that quote from the beginning, you know, the alienation and disconnection from one's body. That's really, I mean, what this interoceptive piece is working with. So to be able, you know, to offer our students like at least a few times during a class, not with every cue, because that can be overwhelming and it can be very foreign to some people to be able to feel what's going on in their bodies. So, you know, even just maybe 3 or 4 times throughout an hour-long class, cueing interoception. You know, you can kind of experiment and see what feels right to you, but just giving people this opportunity to perhaps begin to explore, because remembering that the body can feel like such an unpredictable place, unsafe place, that starting to feel what's going on inside, you know, we want to kind of titrate that. And this, of course, you know, depends on the populations that you're working with, how much you know about them, you know, and their ACEs, so to speak, but just knowing that this can be a very challenging area. So we also, to cue interoceptively, we want to avoid using metaphors and abstract ideas. So like visualizations, which, I mean, I really love visualizations, you know, for myself, and used to use them a lot in yoga classes, like sending grounding roots down into the earth, and, you know, but what that does is it takes us out of a concrete present moment experience of our actual physical bodies. And as soon as we kind of go into imagining or visualizing, we leave the realm of the concrete and the visceral, and we're kind of more up in our neocortex. So wanted to mention that, and then also avoiding qualifiers or moralistic language. So like praise, for example, like, oh, good job, great posture, way to go, beautiful, nice, perfect. You know, like we may think, well, what could be wrong with that? But it tends to kind of like rate or value something over something else. And then words like best, or like, I had a yoga teacher once who was always like, find your best posture here, or find your best yoga spine or whatever. And yeah, it just kind of, I feel it in my nervous system, like, oh, I gotta try really hard here, and I want to impress, and I want to, so to kind of avoid language like best or even comfortable, because what if somebody absolutely cannot find comfortable in a seated position? So like saying, come to a comfortable seat. Well, what if that is just not even in the cards right now? Like, then I'm feeling shame, or I'm feeling like I'm doing it wrong, or yeah. So like really leaving words like that out if possible. And just knowing that trauma naturally, like complex trauma, has a moralistic quality to it. Good, bad, shame, those sorts of feelings and energies are generally very common to complex trauma. And then lastly, repetition. It's great to repeat cues 2 times, 3 times, because this supports people who experience dissociation. Like they may not hear the cue the first time. And so if we say it a second time, and even better, a third time, and also knowing that, the neocortex, the information processing part of our brain going offline during trauma, that impacts the way moving forward that people process information. So if we can repeat the cue 2 or 3 times, it gives everybody a chance, like a higher chance of being able to hear what we said and process it, and then be able to try if they want to that particular movement or cue. So keeping our cues physically feelable in the body allows us people to practice interoception, to strengthen their ability to feel what's going on in their bodies. And like I said before, a big interoceptive word we can use is notice or noticing. And some other interoceptive words could be feel or feeling, sensation, curious. Like if you'd like, or if you're curious, maybe noticing if you feel anything in the backs of your legs as you're folding forward, or anything in your back. Really important to name a part of the body, 1 or 2 parts of the body upon which to focus awareness. So like in that example of tilting your head to one side, naming, maybe you feel something in the side of your neck, and maybe you don't, but naming that specific part of the body where they can focus their awareness. Because if we say, as you're breathing, notice how you feel in your body. It's like, oh my gosh, like, where do I even start? Like, that can just be totally overwhelming if we're just saying the whole body. So to name a particular area or 2 that would make sense, but then I should say, add on, or perhaps you feel something elsewhere in your body. And knowing it's completely natural to sometimes not feel any sensation at all. So what we're doing is like creating a lot of space and normalizing any sort of experience, so that nobody feels like they're doing it wrong or they can't do it. Does that make sense? Okay. So any questions about interoception or how we can cue opportunities for interoception in our classes? Or anything that's coming to mind.
I just
And
had
then,
that
yeah,
come up for me as I was listening to the phrasing and the ways that the invitations are offered. I was noticing in my mind to want to ask a question. And I'm just wondering if that is ever an appropriate way in this context to invite. Do you feel anything here? Do you feel this? Or keep it more with the invitational language rather than the direct question?
That's interesting. The way I might say it is like, if you're curious, maybe investigating, like, do I feel anything in the side of my neck? You know, maybe something like that. Or that's kind of how my voice would go there, with bringing in a little bit more of a question. But I really like that. I really like that. Yeah. Cool. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Question around metaphors.
Yeah.
I tend to really like metaphors.
I know.
That they're very like, yeah, that they can be disassociating for some. But
Yeah.
would they be helpful for like any kind of like younger group of students? Because I know that like visualizing can be helpful with kind of shapes and things like that. Or yeah, I'm curious to hear if you've had experience with introspective and with kids.
Yeah, thank you. I don't have experience doing a lot of teaching with children. I've mostly been adults. But these same principles are used with kids. So like David Emerson does a lot of work with kids. And I've never heard him talk about kind of shifting and using metaphors with children. I know that his sessions with kids are like a lot shorter than sessions with adults, like even like maybe 15 minutes of trauma sensitive yoga, you know. But it is just keeping people kind of in their bodies, or at least allowing them the chance to be focused on their bodies during the time that they're in the class. But I hear you. I mean, I was like flowery yoga language and metaphors and all kinds of wonderful visualizations before I became aware more of trauma sensitive yoga and the positive impact of really keeping it concrete and physically feelable. But I would just say, you know, maybe explore that, like see if there's anything out there, like research or even just the experiences that you have with kids. How do they respond to it? And I also want to say that for some people, like who aren't necessarily dealing with traumatic experience, metaphors are fine. They're completely fine. But when it comes to someone being quite disconnected from their body, we know that metaphors tend to just keep people out of their body. So the purpose of trauma sensitive yoga is to bring people back in. Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. Okay, do you all need like to go to the bathroom, or are you doing that as we go? Because we have about 40.
Break to go move. Yeah.
Yeah.
You are saying, and I was thinking about you, Jessa, that you might want to get up for a few minutes. So
Yes, awesome.
A little break and then come back.
That sounds great.
So let's be back at 11:30.
That sounds good.
Nope, that's it.
It
Huh?
doesn't. Okay, so
My legs are.
thank you. We'll take a break and we'll put you on pause
Okay,
and then we'll come back on. So thank you so much.
that sounds great. Yeah. Awesome.
I also have all of those.
Because there's a different, I can push.
So if I pause this, is it right here? Just this one.
Great.
Okay, now we put you back on.
Okay, super. Great, welcome back. So I'm hoping to do just maybe 15 more minutes of information and then end with 15 more minutes of embodiment. So let's dive right back into the teacher or facilitator qualities. And this is based on the TCTSY research around what made students feel safe in yoga class or feel safe with a teacher. And first and foremost was the warmth, the empathy, the kindness of the teacher or facilitator. And this lines up with therapeutic alliance research, which is research that's been being gathered for many, many years regarding the therapist-client relationship, like in therapy. And what's been found in the therapeutic alliance research is that warmth and empathy are of greater importance than any technique a therapist could offer. Warmth and empathy are of greater importance than any technique a therapist could offer to a client. So warmth and empathy are clearly just foundational. And I love this Judith Herman quote, that core experiences of psychological trauma are disempowerment and disconnection from others. Healing from trauma is based upon the empowerment of the survivor and the creation of new connections. And then this David Emerson quote, humans can adapt and heal when given appropriate relational encounters later in life. That is so beautiful. And so that piece around warmth and empathy and kindness is about really developing rapport and relationship with our students. Predictability and consistency is what helped students to feel safe. Predictability and consistency correlate with the building of trust, with the building of safety. And so some of the ways that we as yoga teachers or facilitators can be predictable with our students, one way could be consistency. Well, I'll start with how we use language. First and foremost, consistency in how we use language. So from a trauma sensitive lens, it would be consistency with invitations, as well as offering options or choices with each posture or breath work exercise or whatever. Options. We can be consistent in how we dress. So from the research, the TCTSY research, students generally felt comfortable when teachers wore kind of more conventional clothing, kind of natural, kind of loose, kind of non-sporty, even in a sense like non-yoga clothes. Yoga clothes aren't bad, but basically it's just like not flashing the name brands, and so it's about accessibility. It's about because shame is such an inherent or just predominant experience within trauma, especially complex trauma. Like if a yoga teacher walks into the room and they're just decked out, in brands and just there can be this sense of like, oh my God, like that I feel so far from that, you know, or that's not even within my grasp, or I'm intimidated. So kind of the more just like low key, like I usually wear, I'll show you what I'm wearing in a little while, like for pants, but I usually wear kind of looser pants, or capris, and then like a shirt like I'm wearing, like kind of just a long sleeve or a t-shirt, but kind of loose. Yeah. And so being consistent in how we dress is one way. And then being just thoughtful about what we choose to wear. We can also be predictable in what kind of energy we bring to class. So in the research, it was shown that when a teacher shows up with like big personality and sparkle and like high energy and a lot of charisma, that also there can be this sense of like, I'll never be that bright. I'll never be that happy. I'll never be that positive and energized. You know, students can really feel far from that energy. So it was shown that like kind of just a steady, kind of quieter, just mellow vibe felt best to students who've experienced trauma. We can also be predictable in how we set up the room, how we set up our space, and we'll cover that at the end under the environment. We can also be predictable in offering choices, like I said at the beginning. So just consistently inviting and offering options. And like I touched on before, 2 or 3 options, A, B, or A, B, C. Otherwise, it can be overwhelming. Nuances, cueing, and this is under the choice, offering choice section, but like within cueing choices, you can also invite people to choose if they want to move faster or slower, as well as a range of movement. Like it's up to you how high you lift your arms or how far you lower your arms down. It's just giving choices, you know, as often as we can. And there's a quote from a TCTSY study participant, a student in one of the classes, that said, "You can't remind me enough times that I have choices. You can't remind me enough times that I have choices." And another student said, "After 8 weeks of trauma sensitive yoga, I went to the grocery store and I knew what I wanted." Yeah, I knew what I wanted. So remembering that the nature of trauma is an extreme lack of choice, often, just the act of choosing is an antidote to that. So we as yoga teachers can provide our students with that opportunity in class. And then moving to shared power. So this is still teacher qualities. Like we talked about, the teacher facilitator role has inherent power in it. So what do we do with that power? How do we hold that power? And we know that power dynamics are a part of traumatic experiences, especially with complex trauma. Misuse of power, someone hoarding power, wielding power over, coercion, manipulation, abandonment. I love this Judith Herman quote. She says, "No intervention that takes power away from an individual can possibly foster their recovery, no matter how much it appears to be in their immediate best interest." No intervention that takes power away from an individual can possibly foster their recovery, no matter how much it appears to be in their immediate interest. So the shared power piece, creating a sense of we're in this together, leveling the playing field, using invitational language rather than commands, offering options. These are all ways that we can foster the shared power dynamic. And another way is to stay in one place during class. Like I mentioned before, practicing on our own mat right along with our students, to not stand outside of the experience as the teacher. Like we're right there in it with our students. And this also, when we're practicing right along with our students, we're able to then cue from our own interoception. Yeah, we're able to cue from what we're feeling in our bodies in that moment, in real time. And staying in one place while we're facilitating also has the benefit of predictability. So students, especially, you know, when there's hypervigilance, which is a common impact of trauma, like students don't have to expend any energy tracking the teacher around the room. Like they know exactly where the teacher will be at all times. So that can allow students who do experience hypervigilance to at least not be having it in relation to you, the teacher. And then lastly, if we're staying in one place during class, this implies that we're not going to be giving physical assists or adjustments, that we will not be going into the student's space. And again, that's a level of predictability, and we'll talk about that in a second. But then lastly, the shared authentic experience. You know, as teachers, we provide invitations, choices, interoceptive possibilities, and at the same time, we are engaging with everything that we are offering. So we're facilitating and we're participating. And then lastly, under teacher qualities, this sense of being open to feedback. So that we're accessible, we have a sense of humility and openness, and a commitment to shared power. Like we're not above feedback. We're open to feedback from our students. And then just quickly with physical assists or adjustments, in the trauma-centered, trauma-sensitive yoga research, at the beginning, they did offer physical assists in class. And the reasoning was that they didn't want students to feel untouchable. They thought they could offer examples of safe touch. And half of the participants dropped out, like continuously. Half of them dropped out. And they received the feedback from those that dropped out. These are quotes. "When you put your hands on me, I feel like I have to do it your way." So it's undermining empowerment and agency. Another quote, "I feel like I'm doing something wrong, like you're correcting me." So the shame piece, which is a core trauma dynamic, and the good bad binary, which is also triggering of the trauma paradigm. So thinking about power dynamics with physical assists, and the question, like, who's in charge of this body? Like, are we really letting our students be in charge of their bodies? And if we're using invitational language in class, like the message from our voice is to our students is like, you're in charge of your body. But then if we go over and put our hands on someone and change something, the message from our hands is like, no, I'm in charge. I, the teacher, am in charge. I know best. So I'll come back to this in a second, but I also want to touch on if someone has difficulty localizing touch, like if we touch them on their hip, but they feel it somewhere else in their body, we don't know where that is. So that there's that risk. And then the other one would be if someone has difficulty interocepting, feeling what's going on in their body, you know, first of all, we may ask them if they want an adjustment. They may not be able to know, but they may still say yes. to not disappoint the teacher or for whatever reason. And we think about the power dynamic there. And then also during an adjustment, they may not be able to feel the stretch or the whatever's happening in the adjustment. They may not be able to say, oh, wait, that's a little bit too much. Or can you stop there? Or because they may not be able to track the physical sensation. So there are definitely reasons to really think deeply if you're going to give physical assist in a class, to think about it like deeply, like, why do I want to do this? What is it for? And then if you are going to give physical assist, to really provide as much choice around it as possible. So like I've been in yoga classes where the teacher hands out cards that say like yes or no, and you can kind of put it by your mat. And yes means I'm open to adjustments. No means don't touch me. So that could be useful. But even then, like thinking about the power dynamic, if someone has a pattern of wanting to please the other person, the person in power, because it's a way of safety, having safety based on abusive situations or whatever from the past, they may still say yes, thinking that the teacher wants to give adjustments, you know? So giving choice around physical assist is complex because of the inherent power that the teacher has. Do you have any? Yeah, go ahead.
So, over here. So I've been asking because we've spent 2 years not touching anybody and staying on our mats, and we'll have a discussion collectively this afternoon based on what we were learning today with Jessa, and some ways that Tracy and I have taken this information, embodied it, and tried to use it in our own classes. And I find it really interesting because we haven't moved off of our mats, and we haven't touched bodies in the classroom for 2 years. And as an experiment, the last couple of weeks I've been asking, as we've had more people in there, they know me and they know that I'm not forcing, like, so I already have rapport with most of these students. So hopefully there's no sense of expectation. I say at the beginning of all my classes, you know your body best. If I'm seeing, like, there's lots of caveats in terms of like a regular yoga class and how to do some trauma informed, not some, but teach a trauma informed class, but to like the public, I would say.
Yeah.
And so I've been asking just to get a pulse on this. And after all those caveats, having them move a little bit in their bodies, and then like in child's pose, just asking, not if you, so we used to ask something like, if you would like for me to not touch you, could you please raise your hand? Which then also does imply that I'm going to touch you, only if you say no, I'm not going to. So switching that around and asking, if you would like, either today in class or in future classes, would you like me to come into your space and put my hand on your body? Every single person whom I've asked thus far is a big, huge yes. I also find that interesting when we spent 2 years of not having that physical contact. And then also I just want to say, like, how does it inform your body? And then notice when we want to kind of make the assumption that a third or so people coming to our classes probably have experienced some pretty significant trauma.
Yeah.
So then how do we teach in light of that? So I just wanted to say those couple of things as a perspective as to what I'm seeing and sensing and actually physically seeing from people.
Yeah, amazing, Shelley. Thank you so much. Wow. Yeah, that's incredible. And when you know people, when you have that rapport with people over time, that really opens things up, because then you can start, there's that shared power that's been laid down, and you can start to have conversations where the person really may be able to let you know, yeah, I do want touch, or no, I don't. That's great. And so with this piece on physical assist, like, I really encourage you to just like talk about it and like hash through it and all the pros and cons, and just, And you can even, like, if you have a class description and you physical assists are part of that class, like let's say an Ashtanga class, you could put in the description, physical assists will be offered during this class. And then people reading the description could choose, oh, then I don't want to go, or oh, then I do want to go. That's another way to kind of, assuming people read descriptions, but offering as much choice as you can is always the key. And keeping in mind some of the brain stuff, as well as power dynamics when we start to bring touch in. So just last couple minutes, when it comes to the postures, the breath work, like the exercises themselves, thinking of them more as like a means rather than a goal. So it's an opportunity for present moment experience and interoception. It's an opportunity to practice choice making in the present moment, cultivating agency. It's an opportunity for students to take action based on interoception in their own best interest. Rather than like, oh, I want to get the perfect half moon pose, like, and then in terms of choosing postures or forms, to just keep trauma awareness in mind. So always offering 2 or 3 options. So for example, if you're going to cue like supine butterfly, reclining butterfly, Supta Baddha Konasana, lying on your back, soles of your feet together with your knees out to the sides. This could be activating for some people. It's very much hip opening, it's chest opening. So you could also offer the option to maybe bring the soles of your feet together, knees out to the side, but fold forward. So there's the opportunity to be folded forward or lying back. And then you could also cue a third option. You might want to extend your legs out in front of you instead of having your knees out to the side and fold forward or lie back. So thinking about postures that could be more activating, like pelvic area, hip opening, chest opening, and then make sure that you're giving options where those parts of the body aren't open or don't need to be open. I mentioned like pace wise, slower rather than faster is a way to create predictability, offering choices. And then lastly, with our environment, like just doing the best with the space that we have to work with. So the lighting, usually lighter rather than darker is better if you have a choice. Windows, if it's street level, like if there are curtains, being able to close the curtains so that passersby are not looking in. The door, like I taught at a studio for a long time where there was lots of passerby traffic. And so I would lock the door during class so people wouldn't just walk in, because you just walk right into the studio. And so I would narrate to the students, okay, I'm locking the door. If you need to get out at any time during class, here's how you unlock the door. And then I would open the door to like show that, okay, it's step 1, and then boom, the door is open and you can leave, so that they don't feel trapped or unsure about how to get out. Mirrors, it's generally better to cover them up, or if you can't, like face the opposite direction if possible. Music, being aware of the music that we play and how it could potentially trigger people, like with lyrics or with like deep bass or the volume and intensity, as well as being aware of how music could cause distraction or dissociation, kind of take people out of their bodies. And then like noise and interruptions, if something happens, like it can be really helpful to narrate it. Like a siren you know, is going by or whatever. Or I've had car accidents happen right outside of the yoga studio. And so to be able to say, okay, all the commotion outside, like it looks like there's an accident that's just happened, and, you know, going from there, but like bringing attention to it and narrating it. And like, if you're going to get off of your mat and go, let's say, turn the temperature down a little bit, I would say, I'm going to go over to the thermostat now and adjust the temperature, and then I'll come back to my mat. So just to really let people know where you are and what you're doing. And then props, there's the awareness that certain props could trigger, like ropes on the wall, like in an Iyengar studio, could be very triggering. Sometimes straps, you know, can be triggering. But yeah, just the main thing is really just having awareness. So the more that you can learn about trauma and the impact on the body, the more that you can integrate that into all parts of your life. Okay, so, it takes more time than what we have, but we have several minutes left. So I want to just check in and see, do you have any questions or last comments or anything at all? And then I could either stay a few minutes longer and just guide like one form, or we could close and you could move into your next portion.
Jessa, we would love for them to hear one form, one shape, if you would like to do that. I think that will inform the rest of our day.
Okay, awesome. I'll do that. And is there anything any of you want to say or ask before we go into that?
Regarding like all the research that you had mentioned, and I could go on the website and look too, but I'm curious, is that research based primarily out of like the United States or countries in Europe? I'm wondering how it can be applied to different cultures in different countries, experiencing different types of trauma and just cultures in general.
Yeah, great question. Most of the research that I'm aware of, and there may be some new studies, but most of them have been here in the United States. And DAP, the Domestic Abuse Project, we were actually part of one study in 2013 and 2014. So it was with women who have survived domestic violence. So there's all kinds of different studies, like with different groups of people, populations, but here in the US, that you can find on the Trauma Sensitive Yoga website. And then, I mean, the TCTSY has expanded and is expanding so much that I wouldn't be surprised if there are already studies from different countries that are on there. So I need to go check and update, but there will be if there are none yet, because they are deeply committed to empirical research data. Okay, so should we move into just a little bit of movement? Okay, so I'm gonna move my computer and I'm gonna sit on my mat, but you don't need a mat because we'll just do seated since we're here in this space. But let me just move myself. Okay. Okay, and so just an example of kind of what I'm wearing is just some loose pants. Loose pants and kind of just looser kind of understated top. So feel free, like as you're ready, just feel free to come into a position. It could be seated, you could be cross-legged, you could have your feet on the floor or kind of hanging down. You could also stand. So if you want to, seated or standing, you could also kneel if you want to, if your space allows. And then maybe as you're ready, just beginning to feel once again your breath coming in through your nose or through your mouth and moving out through your nose or through your mouth. Your eyes, feel free to have them open or closed. It's completely up to you. And maybe noticing how your breath is feeling in your body. Maybe that sensation of movement in your chest or belly or elsewhere in your body as you breathe in and out at your own pace, your own time. And something that I didn't mention while we were talking is that the teacher's voice becomes an anchor to the present moment. And so in trauma sensitive yoga, we tend to not leave a lot of space that is silent. Some, but the teacher's voice is the anchor, the steady anchor in the present moment. And remembering the repetition of cues is so helpful to keep people connected to the present moment. So if you would like to, feel free to remain in stillness, noticing your breath. If you would like to start to bring some movement in, perhaps some neck movement, one option would be you could lower your chin if you want to, down towards your chest. And you could hold this stretch as long as you wish, or when you're ready, if you want to, you could lift your chin and maybe even tilt your head back a little bit, just to whatever degree you wish. And then feel free to move back and forth if you want to, knowing you can hold in a particular position as long as you wish, or you can move back and forth. So this is one option for bringing movement into your neck, of lowering and lifting your chin. Another option, if you want to try it, could be to bring one ear over towards its nearest shoulder. So kind of tilting your head to one side if you wish. And if you're trying this out, if you want to, maybe noticing if you feel any sensation in the side of your neck that's stretching here. You could hold here as long as you want to, and whenever you're ready, if you want to move to the other side, feel free to do so. Bringing your other ear towards its nearest shoulder. Maybe sensing any feeling in the side of your neck, knowing it's completely natural to sometimes not feel anything at all. And feel free to go back and forth at your own pace if you want to, side to side, or lifting and lowering your chin. And the third option could be, if you want to circle your head. These could be small circles or bigger circles. Could be half circles. Feel free to explore if you want to, the circling or half circling of your head, or tilting your head side to side, or lifting and lowering your chin. Knowing you can always choose to explore some other movement or come back to stillness. Maybe 3 or 4 more cycles of breathing. Knowing you can always stop sooner. Yeah, and feel free if you want to continue, feel free to do so. And whenever you feel complete, feeling free to come back to kind of neutral, back to center as you're ready. Yeah, so we'll end there. But hopefully that gives you another little taste of the nature of this practice. And know that you can go to my website, and I've got a couple audio recordings, a seated practice, and then a body scan, if you want to just hear more, because it's so much about the language. And then of course the power dynamic, and then the warmth, the empathy, the feeling of like, I'm with you, and wanting to foster the students' agency and empowerment. Thank you all so much. I hope you just continue to have an incredible weekend. I really appreciate the opportunity to be with you, and it's just very meaningful to me. So thank you so much for your interest and curiosity. And thank you, Shelley and
Thank
Tracy,
you.
for having
Thank
me.
you for
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jessa.
offering the
Absolutely.
gift of empowerment to us to pass on. It just feels very, very, very important. So thank you.
Awesome. And be in touch anytime. I think you have my email. I think I put it on there. Okay.
Thank you.
Enjoy.
Have a
Bye.
good day. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.